Hi guys, this is Miss Basaraba, and I'm going to go through a short tutorial with you guys about the scientific method. I'm just going to go quickly through these steps, touch on the vocabulary a little bit, and really I want to focus more on variables because I know that's probably one of the places that you guys feel a lot more uncertain. So this is just a general image about the scientific method. You could go look up lots of them. They're not all going to look the same. This is just one that I pulled up. Um, it starts out with a question. This can also be referred to as a problem. You will not have a lab if you do not have a question or problem. That will always be the first part of the scientific method unless you somehow restarted the loop. But it is the beginning of the process because you're going to have that question or problem, which could be something like, does sunlight affect plant growth? Okay. Now, background research. This is only necessary if you have no prior knowledge at all about whatever the topic is. If you have prior knowledge about the topic, then you may base your hypothesis just off your prior knowledge. But if need be, you might need to do some background research so you can construct a hypothesis. Because a hypothesis has to be an if then because statement that is an educated guess about what's going to happen when you're trying to answer this question. So you're going to construct this hypothesis, if then because, then you're going to test your hypothesis, which is just doing the experiment, which is also following a set of procedures that whether you've designed the procedures or the teacher or whomever's giving you procedures that you're going to follow in order to conduct this experiment. So during this time when you're conducting this experiment, you're going to be collecting your data. The data is going to most likely be organized on a data table, and sometimes that data may actually be put into a graph to make it easier for you to look at. Also, putting it in a graph many times makes this next step easier, being able to analyze your data. Analyzing the data means you're going to take a closer look at that data. You're going to be able to actually look at it and be able to read it. And that's going to allow you to be able to draw a conclusion. And drawing your conclusion means that you're going to be able to state things such as, were you able to support your hypothesis? Was it true or not? And then you're also going to be able to go back into this data that you collected in here, and you're going to be able to use that to support the yes or no as to if you proved or disproved your hypothesis. So, important stuff right there. This step down here, this is talking about how you're going to report your results. And when you report your results, that could be anything from you just turning in a lab sheet to me asking you to write a conclusion, to like if you were a scientist, you actually publishing in a scientific journal. Okay, so now I'm going to move on from there and I'm going to go into the vocabulary a little bit. This is an assignment that you guys should have all done. I'm not going to go over every little thing about it. I've already kind of, touched on these things like the scientific method. We know this is the set of steps that we follow. I just explained about the question or problem, the hypothesis, procedures, observations. That's when you use your five senses in order to gain information when you're gathering information about the investigation. Now, getting into these two words. These are two words that you may not be as familiar with. You need to get very familiar with them. Quantitative observations. If you think about the beginning of that term, it starts out with quantity. And quantity has to deal with numbers. So if your mom had asked you to go into the store and get 5 apples, she's given you a quantity of how many she wanted. So if you were ever asked about to determine which is a quantitative observation, then you know it's going to be the one that has numerical information in it. Qualitative has to deal with all the other types of observations that can be made, and they're not numerical. So it could be color, shape, how something feels, smells, anything else. Any way that you could describe it would be something qualitative. Now, you could make observations that could contain quantitative and qualitative at the same time. Like you might be able to state something like there are 24 blue chairs. Well, 24 was quantitative, blue is qualitative. I will not be putting anything on the test where I'm trying to trick you up and give you something that's both. Okay. But just letting you know that it is possible that you could have an observation that contained both types of observations in it. Next step going over, I've already talked about this. This is the information that you're going to gather. This information could be numerical or it could be things that is qualitative that describes data table, how we organize it, control group. This is the group that doesn't receive the treatment. Without getting into just like a huge, talk about this, I gave the scenario here and I put that half the class gets Red Bull and the other half gets something similar without the energy. So it would look the same, taste the same. It just doesn't have any of those components that Red Bull do that claim to give us energy. And so we would test this to see does Red Bull actually work to give energy. Well, the group that does not receive the treatment is called the control group. And the group that receives the treatment is called the experimental group. Now, I'm not going to get into talking about results of things like this. This is just explicitly to explain what a control group is. So the next thing over here is I'm going to get into talking about variables. And the variables is, I feel like this is one of the places that people are really struggling right now. And that's because I haven't been able to teach you about these. So I want to talk about independent variable first, because once you understand the independent variable, I feel like it's better to understand the dependent. So how I always start out talking about this when I'm in classes, I always say independent variable starts with the word I. This is the variable I change or control in the lab. So when you go read a lab scenario or you go read that question, you would ask yourself, which of those variables would I be manipulating, changing, in control of when I'm doing the lab? So if we said, does sunlight affect plant growth? Okay, so we got two variables there, sunlight, plant growth. Okay, so which one of those could I manipulate? I could manipulate the amount of sunlight that the plant's going to receive. I can't just stand there and make that plant grow. Okay, that's not something I can do. So the independent variable in that scenario I just gave you would be the amount of sunlight. So now let's go see the dependent variable. This is the variable that you measure or you collect data about during the investigation. So now let me go back to that same scenario I just gave you. Does sunlight affect plant growth? Okay, so if the independent variable was the amount of sunlight, and I just told you that the dependent variable is what you're going to measure, well, what am I going to measure in that scenario? I'm going to measure the plant growth. So that's what the dependent variable is. So when you're going through these scenarios, when you're practicing, if you will ask yourself these questions, and I always start with the independent variable when I'm looking at a scenario, and I read it to myself and I say, well, if I was doing this lab, which one of these variables am I going to control? If I'm the scientist, what am I controlling? Okay, and then it's going to be the one that changes. So let's say that if I was going to test sunlight and plant growth, I might say that I'm going to have one plant that I'm going to give 2 hours of sun, one plant that's going to get 4, one that's going to get 6, and go all the way to 12 hours. Okay, I decided that times. Okay, that was something I determined. Now I'm going to have those plants exposed at those time periods. The information that I collected, which is how much they grew, is going to be my dependent variable. Okay, so hopefully that'll help clarify independent, dependent variable. Graph, it's just a way of organizing your data. An inference is a guess based on an observation. There was an image in something that I had put out there that was in Google Classroom, and you guys might not be familiar, may not have seen the assignment, but it had a little boy that was in a pond, and there was a tree that was above him, and the tree branch was broken. And so an observation of that could have been the branch is broken. Like you can obviously see that branch is broken. Where an inference would come in is I have no idea how that branch broke, but could I infer? Could I guess how that branch broke? Absolutely. So someone had said in class, a storm broke the branch. I would think that is a good guess, a good inference as to how the branch broke. You could have also inferred that the boy jumped off the branch, and when he jumped off the branch, it caused it to break. So there's no just one inference is right, but it needs to be plausible. Like from whatever you're making an inference about, it needs to be a possible thing, not just something like from the way out yonder that you're just guessing and it has nothing to do with what's going on. The next thing, analysis. That's where you're actually looking at your stuff, like you're breaking it down, you're looking at it, you're making sense of it because you're about to get to the point to where you're going to write a conclusion. Okay. Conclusion is a really important part of the scientific method. This is where you're going to discuss the overall results of an experiment, including if your hypothesis was correct or not. If you have gone and looked at the key that I gave you guys for the application vocabulary, I gave a very good conclusion example in that. So my suggestion is if you don't already have access to application of vocabulary, you need to request that from me. But I haven't been sending it out to students unless they've requested it because they finished the assignment, because I want you to try it first. What a trial is that's when you conduct an experiment multiple times. Just doing it one time, you don't have anything to compare it to. So, like, even for example, like in medical, like clinical trials, they don't just try a medication one time and then just say, oh, it's okay to give it to everybody. So you conduct multiple trials so that you can compare the information and make sure that the data that you're collecting is valid. So you do repeated trials of the same experiment. Constant variable, this is a word that I added on because I realized that I had left that out, and this is really important. When I mentioned to you earlier and I talked to you about the independent variable, and I said that's the variable that I'm controlling. Okay, so if in that scenario we said, how does sunlight affect plant growth? Okay, so sunlight was our independent variable and plant growth was our dependent variable. Well, constant variables are all the other variables that could affect plant growth. So you guys could sit here and probably name things if we were having a conversation and tell me some things that would affect plant growth besides sunlight, like the amount of water, the type of soil that it's planted in, the temperature, if it's receiving fertilizer. We could go on and name all kinds of things that would need to be constant variables because you only want to change one variable at a time when you're doing an experiment. If you change more than one variable at a time, then your experiment isn't going to be valid. You don't know what actually gained you the results that you got. Okay, so now I'm going to go over here to this, and this was an assignment that I had placed. It's up underneath the scientific method review in your Google Classroom, and I'm going to go through just a couple of these real quick with you guys and show you some things about them, like what you would have done with this. And then this could be something that you could go back and practice on at home. And like I said, if the Cami don't work for you at home, you can try to see if this will open up in a Google Doc. If it won't open up in a Google Doc, just get a piece of paper out and write the answers down. You have a key that's going to be up underneath it, and you can go and check your answers. So we're going to start here with number 1. And with number 1, it says that, let me get my little highlighter going. It says that a study was done to find out if different tire treads affect the braking distance of the car. So I'm starting with my independent variable. So what is it that I am in control of when I'm testing this? So this is going to be something that I could change as the experimenter. Okay, so what I could change as the experimenter is I could change the types of tire treads. So that's going to be my independent variable. So that's what we go right here for this one. So now for the dependent variable, what is it that we're measuring with this? A study was done to find out if different tire treads affect the braking distance of the car. So what am I measuring? I am measuring the braking distance of a car. Okay, so that would be my dependent variable. Okay, and I'm just taking and highlighting these just because it's just time saving, so that I'm not having to sit here and try to type. So this last one is a constant. So there are lots and lots of constants that you can name. And if you go look at my key, I'm not even going to have even close to all the things that might be constant. But talking about this experiment right here, different tire treads and the braking distance of a car. Well, something that might need to be constant. One of the first things that would come to my mind is the car itself, because even though you have different tires on it, different cars have different masses, and that would definitely affect the wear on the tire treads. But also think about the time of day, because if it were in the morning, the roads are pretty cool. But if you went out about like this time of year, about 3 p.m. in the afternoon, the temperature of the road is so much hotter, and your tires are made of rubber. So your tires are going to be heating up more. So that could also have an effect. So you would just have to think about anything that you would want to keep the same, and it would be anything that you think might affect this experiment other than this, because this is your independent variable. So you could put anything there for the constant. So now I'm going to go through this next one with you as an example. The time it takes to run a mile depends on the person's running speed. Okay? So, what is it that I am in control of? Okay, so that's what I'm asking myself. What am I in control of? And then the dependent is going to be what I'm measuring. Well, what am I in control of? The time it takes to run a mile depends on a person's running speed. Well, what I'm in control of is the person's running speed. I might tell one person that I want them to literally walk. And then I may tell another person that I want them to do a speed walk. And I may have another person that I say jog. And I may tell another person that I want them to run as fast as they can. Okay, now let's go to, well, what's our dependent variable? What is it that we're measuring? We're measuring the time it takes to run a mile. That's what we're going to measure. That's going to be our dependent variable. So now let's talk about what could be a constant here. Okay, now this says the time it takes to run a mile depends on a person's running speed. You might even want to make it be the same person as a constant, and you just have them do it at different paces. Or what about terrain? Do you think it would matter if they were running like on a cross country track, like over hills and mountains and through the mud, versus on like just a circular track? Like I said, time of day, weather, you could name anything that could affect this outcome could be a constant for this. Okay, I'm going to do one more of these, and then after that, I'm going to leave this be. Okay, so for this next one, it says the height of bean plants depends on the amount of water they receive. So again, we want to identify our independent variable. So what am I in control of in this experiment? We've already done one kind of like this as I've talked. So I'm in control of the amount of water that the plants are going to receive. So now, what is it that I'm going to measure? That's my dependent variable. I'm going to be measuring the height of the bean plants. Now for a constant. Again, we can think of numerous things that could affect the growth of a bean plant. It could have anything to do with the temperature, the fertilizer, the type of soil they're planted in. You could just go on and on. You only have to name one constant. So that shouldn't be a big deal for you to be able to come up with those. So I'm posting this video out there for you guys to help you out with these variables. So I really want you to try to work through this and be able to do this. You need to feel comfortable with independent, dependent variable, and constants, and also control before you would be making an attempt on my test. The control group, again, I just want to make sure, because down here it brings that up and it's not up there. Remember, the control group is who's not receiving the test. So like if we looked at this one right here, a student wanted to test how the mass of a paper airplane affected the distance it would fly. Paper clips were added before each test flight. As each paper clip was added, the plane was tested to determine how far it would fly. So the initial thing right here, the first sentence is like the actual thing where you're going to get your independent and your dependent variable, okay? So a student wanted to test how the mass of a paper airplane, so mass of the paper airplane is going to be your independent variable. What is it I'm going to be measuring? The distance it can fly, okay? So the control, if what we're going to do is add paper clips to the plane to increase its mass, a control would be the paper airplane with no paper clips added. You want it to just be the same. Or also, it would be very important, well, that's going to really get into a constant, but the control is going to be with no paper clips. But a constant, something that you would want to keep the same, and especially you guys would get this, is that it needs to be the exact same model of airplane. Like you want the same person making it, like every crease needs to be the same. The paper needs to be the same type of paper, like on and on and on. You could think of all kinds of things that would need to stay the same about that experiment. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and end this video. If you guys have any questions after you watch this, all you've got to do, shoot me those questions through Remind. Send them to me in POP. However, you're communicating with me, don't hesitate to question me, because I want to help you guys better understand this so that you're going to feel prepared to take this exam. I'm hoping to soon start doing some videos in class when I'm actually teaching some of the classes, so that I could just post those to you instead of having to come and do something like this. But hopefully this will at least help you for the time being. All right, you guys have a great night.